The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the seventh and final day of this May 7-day sesshin here in 2021 at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. The culmination of an intensive period of practice, starting with the April sesshin and then going a few days later into this May sesshin. It's an incredible opportunity to really deepen one's practice. And those of you who've been here and been part of it won't have a clear picture for a while of how deeply you've been able to go through this double header, but it is very powerful, quite powerful. I wish we could do it frequently, but because we're in America and because it's more difficult for people to come here, then it's not so easy. Of course, we have several of you here via Zoom, which is excellent. And that is so heartening because it allows people to be here pretty effectively, taking part in sesshin, even though they're in New Jersey or California or New York State. Munen, Muso, Mujo. No thought, no mind, and no abiding. This is actually one of the more advanced Rinzai koans, and it traces back to the sixth patriarch, Huineng, who really was a flashpoint for Zen practice or Chan practice, which ultimately became Zen practice in Japan and Son practice in Korea. Before that, it was pretty limited. Bodhidharma, for example, had 4 successors. And there wasn't much activity beyond a very narrow stream between Bodhidharma and the sixth patriarch. But as you've heard, Huineng, when he was 19 years old and had grown up half an orphan, his mother was alive, but his father had died when he was 3. And he had essentially grown up in the woods, helping his mother gather firewood to be sold to survive on, to make enough money to be able to buy food and live a very frugal life. And so already he was in an environment that was conducive to inner search and to really a lack of distractions. Of course, back then, there weren't the kinds of distractions that we have now. There was no internet, there was no TV, there was no electricity. There were no trains. There just wasn't much in the way of distraction people could get involved in. Life was much simpler, and as a result, it was easier to practice. And as you heard, one day as he was delivering a load of firewood to a client, he overheard a wandering pilgrim reciting a part of the Diamond Sutra, which read, "Arouse the mind that abides nowhere. Arouse the mind that abides nowhere." We all will have this idea that up here is the source of our mind, but that is far, far, far from the truth. The mind is universal. It is all things. In this Tibetan book that shares the teachings of Longchenpa, a Tibetan master from, I think it's the 10th or 11th century, is titled, "You Are the Eyes of the World." And that is absolutely phenomenally true. Each one of us is the eyes of the world. And because we have different conditioning, different experiences, different assumptions, we see the world in very different ways. And that can cause a lot of problems, particularly since we end up being quite attached to our views. Arouse the mind without it abiding anywhere. No attachment to views. The sixth patriarch was the source of another koan, a breakthrough koan that goes like this. After he made his way on foot to the monastery of the fifth patriarch, and it took quite a long time, a month or so of walking north, and eventually he was at the fifth patriarch's temple for quite a few months, almost a year. When he was first interviewed by the abbot, by the fifth patriarch, it was very clear to the fifth patriarch that this man had already seen rather deeply, because he was asked, why are you here? And Huineng replied, I came only to realize Buddha. And testing him, the fifth patriarch shot back, you're a hick from the south. What would you know about Buddhahood? And quietly, Huineng responded, while there is north and south, there is no north and south in Buddhahood. Buddha knows no north or south. And that made the fifth patriarch recognize that there was something very special about this young man, that he had seen something quite deep. But back then, Chinese monasteries were, and still are, enormous. And they were filled, as monasteries will be, with all manner of human beings, including some who actually had escaped prosecution in order to, as a ploy, they joined a monastery and became a monk, to the point where the Chinese government got onto this and eventually passed a ruling that anyone who was ordained as a monk or a nun had to go through a ceremony where 3 cones of incense were burnt right here. A cone of incense is about this big, maybe something like an inch long. And it's a cone of incense, and there's no incense holder. It's just placed on your scalp, 3 of them. And it was assumed by the government officials that nobody who wasn't really serious about Zen practice would be willing to go through the pain that would cause. And you can tell to this day who, at least in Taiwan, is an ordained monk or nun, because you can see the little round scars, the 3 little round scars on the top of the head. I actually, when I was there at one point, I encountered some nuns that actually had 3 sets of these marching back up their scalp. And I asked about that, and they said that the ceremony was so meaningful that they chose to repeat it again and again. And of course, each time they had the incense cones burned on their heads as a demonstration of their commitment, their firm resolve to come to awakening for the benefit of all beings. We don't have such a thing in America. And American Zen has a different flavor. There is still the opportunity to go quite deep. And we have in the past, and during these 2 sesshin as well, have had the possibility of having residents here, particularly if we are vaccinated, COVID vaccinated, and we wear the masks as well. under certain circumstances. To be able to be in a monastery doing concentrated practice morning and night, coming before the teacher to demonstrate the understanding of your koan or the depth of your practice can really spur a student on. It can be incredibly beneficial. But most people in the United States, in the West in general, are not drawn to becoming monks. And here I use the term for male or female, it doesn't matter. Because they have jobs, they have families, they have careers. And that doesn't necessarily become a problem. It makes it more difficult to go deep in our Zen practice, but it doesn't prevent it. What is most important is our own determination, our own willingness to give ourselves to this profound practice that is seriously liberating. So there were a lot of monks, probably close to 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 monks. Some of them even had slaves, believe it or not. They came from wealthy families and brought their slaves with them. And it's not necessarily known widely that there were slaves in China. Actually, it appears that there may still be slaves in China and in other parts of the world. But they come from all manner of levels of commitment to practice. And the fifth patriarch understood that because Huineng was a layperson and monks were considered to be higher order individuals back then than lay people, and also that he had a depth of understanding that pretty much none of the rest of them had, that his life would be in danger if he paid any real attention to him. So he immediately sent him out to the back to be with the rest of the lay people who were actually supporting the temple by cooking, by taking care of food supplies, raising food, and so on and so forth. And so he did. He was the person that did the hulling of the rice. And to this day, you can still see the small pit and the, I never know whether it's a mortar or pestle. I think it's the pestle that is this big beam that goes down and clunks with the rice in the hole or the mortar and breaks off the hull. And he was not a huge guy. And so rumor has it that he actually had to tie a big stone around his waist to be heavy enough to be able to stand on the end of the pestle that would raise it up out of the hole and then step off and let it go clunk into the hole to hull the rice. He did this for 8 months. And then, and during that 8 months, there was no chance to be in the zendo. It just, the zendo was for the monks and not for the lay people. So he simply continued on, silently deepening his practice in this rote exercise of hulling the rice all day long, days and days and days and days on end. And eventually the fifth patriarch went out to check on him and asked him surreptitiously, has the rice been hulled? Is it ready? And Huineng understood what that meant. And he says, yes, it's ready, but it needs to be sifted. And so the fifth patriarch struck his staff 3 times on the ground and left. And Huineng understood that that meant to come to the fifth patriarch's quarters during the 3rd watch, which is in the middle of the night. And so he did. And the fifth patriarch held his kesa, his outer robe, up against the window to hide any identification of who was in his room with him. while he said, if you have questions, if you need clarification, now is the time to ask. And so for several hours, he and Huineng worked on clarifying the understanding that Huineng had initially opened to and had continued to deepen while he was hulling the rice. It was very clear that the fifth patriarch knew that he would be the sixth patriarch. There was a little exercise that the fifth patriarch went through, writing poems in order to sort of legitimize the decision, but the decision really was made. And he gave the robe and the bowl that had been inherited supposedly all the way from the Buddha to Huineng and said, now you had better leave and get as far away as you can, because as soon as the others discover you're gone and that the robe and bowl is gone, they will start coming after you and your life will be in danger. Huineng understood this and he left, crossed the river and started continuing on down south where he had come from. And sure enough, the next morning when the monks discovered that the robe and the bowl were gone, they set out after him. They figured out who was missing among those thousands of people at the temple and took off after him. And one of the people who was primary in searching for him was a former general who was now a monk, Monk Myo. And he was the one that after some time managed to track him down and catch up with him. Huineng understood that he was about to be apprehended. So he put the robe and the bowl on a rock and went behind a bush. And Monk Myo came up, saw the robe and the bowl, tried to pick it up and couldn't. And it freaked him out. So he called out, lay brother, lay brother, I didn't come for the robe and the bowl, I came for the teaching. And so Huineng stepped out from behind the bush and said, if you want the teaching, let us both do zazen, and then I will teach you. So they sat down and did zazen for some time. And then at a certain point, Huineng said, when you were following me, thinking neither good nor evil, where then was your original face? Your face before your parents were born. And that triggered an awakening in Monk Myo. And that is the source of that koan, show me your original face. Arouse the mind that abides nowhere. No thought, no mind, no abiding. It doesn't mean to just go dumb in the way that we think going dumb is. It means to see so clearly the true nature of reality that we're not caught. There is no catching, being caught by thought. There is no being caught by any ideas about mind. There is no abiding. And I've already shared some of Guogu, the Chinese successor of contemporary master Sheng Yen, in his book, Silent Illumination. This is an excellent book, by the way. And let me quote again this quote, if I can find it. Here we are, by Huineng. Good friends, since the past, this teaching of ours has first taken no thought as its principle, Munen, no form as its essence, Muso, and non-abiding as its foundation, Mujo. No thought means to be without thought, quote unquote, in the midst of thinking. So how can we do that? As you go deeper in your practice, it'll become obvious. No form is to transcend form within the context of forms and appearances. And non-abiding is your fundamental nature. All worldly things are empty. All worldly things are empty. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. As we go more and more deeply into our practice, this begins to make sense. And it doesn't make sense through the normal idea of understanding. It makes sense at a deep, profound level beyond thought, because it requires no thought, no form, and no abiding in order to reach that state of mind. As we do our extended out breath, we are moving closer to that. And I want to share here with you what Gogu says about doing the breath practice, because there's something that you've always been told here that is not just the extended out breath, but it's the extended out breath with a sense of curiosity, a sense of openness to possibility, riding on that out breath, as if there's something down in there that you can connect with that is otherwise more obscured and that is worth it. So here's what he says. If you're meditating on the sensations of the breath while cultivating an attitude of interest, and that is what it's about. It's the sensations of the experience of the breath going out with a curiosity at how does it feel? What is going on here? Only you're not doing it in words like that. Let's back up a little bit and share a little bit more. He talks about interest. And this is where there's a real move away from our traditional way of being taught in Japanese Zen, which is just move, just the practice, just the breath. No thoughts, cut your thoughts. It leads to a very narrow way of practice. It can lead to a kensho, but it does not lead to essential work along the way, or any sense that we have to do essential work afterwards. And that is its great detriment. So here's what Gogu says. Interest is an important attitude that we should cultivate in our lives. Interest has the quality of engagement, but it's not controlling. It's fascination without interference. Fascination without interference. Openness to possibility. A good analogy for non-interference is that of a mother sitting in a room with her toddler, letting the toddler play while she knits. In this way, she is present with the child, but doesn't have to fixate her gazing on them or control their every move. Similarly, in our meditation, we're engaged with the method, but we're not tensely focused on it. Our attitude is contentment, yet with interest. So it's not just blah. It's extending the out breath, reaching. What are we going to comprehend? What are we discovering along the way? If we're tense or controlling, then even if we have the best method in the world, we're not going to be able to use it because our minds will be agitated. But then there's an alternative that is not the way to go either. Thinking of the analogy of a relaxed cat watching a mouse hole. The cat is not terribly intense when watching a mouse hole, but it is focused. It's relaxed, but ready at any moment to pounce on a mouse if it comes out of the hole. It's not tense, but ready and awake. Ready and awake. Its mere presence, sitting awake in front of the mouse hole, is enough to scare the mice. They dare not come out because they know that the cat is there. If you adopt this kind of wakeful interest, your wandering thoughts are subdued because the mind is at once relaxed, yet focused and watchful. Non-interference does not mean disinterest, however. When I was in college, I lived in New York City above a Buddhist temple that had a lazy temple cat. The temple also had mice, lots of them, but the cat never did anything to them. You might say that the cat was too compassionate because he did not kill any of the mice, but I think it was simply disinterested. The mice would walk across the room scavenging for food and crumbs as we were at our dinner, and the cat would just lie there sleeping. In practice, you have to be interested. You can't be like the disinterested, lazy temple cat. You have to develop a clear, watchful mind with which you experience the method, whatever that may be. In this case, it's the extended out breath. The mice, your scattered thoughts, wander. If you don't do anything about them, they'll continue ceaselessly. So if you're meditating on the sensation of the breath while cultivating an attitude of interest, then every breath is fascinating and includes new sensations. This interest keeps you on the method. There's no need to get rid of wandering thoughts, just be more interested in your method. This attitude of interest has a freshness to it. If your mind is interested, vibrant, and wakeful, you won't take your method for granted, believing that you already know how to do it. Every moment is fresh, and you can engage with it fully. This is the right attitude of interest. And it is, without a doubt, this essential curiosity that is essential for us to come to awakening, whatever our practice is, whether it's the koan mu. What on earth is mu? What does it mean? As you know, that particular koan comes from Joshu, another Chinese master who was much later than Huineng, and who was asked by a monk, does even a dog have the Buddha nature? And back then, and I believe it's still prevalent in China now, dogs are not particularly the sweet puppy dogs that they are in the United States. They're not normally, other than the Pekingese dog, taken as pets. They're considered despicable, dirty, wild creatures, as they were in Burma. They were called Pai dogs. I don't know what Pai really meant in Burmese, but that was what they were called. And they scavenged food. They were usually mangy critters, all pretty much looking the same, full of disease and worms and despised by the local population. And so this monk, with an attitude similar to that, saying, you know, Buddha nature is something exalted. How could one of those dogs have it? Does it really have Buddha nature? And Joshu said, no, dog doesn't have Buddha nature. And that was half the story. That was half the correct view. And the other correct view is that all beings have the Buddha nature. So how can that be? How can a dog have and not have the Buddha nature at the same time? And yet that is a profound truth. So that's another one of the breakthrough koans, that and the original face. Who we are. If we are deeply curious about this and use these effective tools, the koans, especially the extended out breath, we will gradually open, without even recognizing it, to this profound truth. And of course, there are layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of this profound truth. It is, it has never really been, as far as I know, that anyone has plumbed it to the very bottom first thing. Even the Buddha, if we are to believe his memories of past lives, was working in his spiritual practice, working towards coming to awakening for at least 6 lifetimes before the final one, in which he did come to a deep, profound awakening. Yet we're all on this path, and we don't necessarily know how long we've been on it, but we're drawn deeply to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here in sesshin. It's not so easy to just sit sesshin out of curiosity, basic fundamental curiosity. Oh yeah, what's a sesshin like? Maybe I'll be interested in it, maybe I won't be. Well, you get a little bit into sesshin with that kind of an attitude, and you're ready to flee. But there's a different level of curiosity, a need to know, a perplexity. It is expressed in, does a dog have the Buddha nature? No. Well, yes. Well, no. It is expressed in the perplexity of the Prajnaparamita Sutra. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Huh? They're telling me that this table sitting next to me is empty? And if I hit it hard enough, I'm really going to hurt my knuckles. But is that what emptiness means? It's kind of interesting that there have been known Indian yogis who have entertained their students by conjuring up things like gems, different things, and they'll just open their hand and suddenly there's a jewel in it. And what was her name? Well, a British woman who got herself snuck into Tibet back in the 1800s and traveled around Tibet for many, many months, and had she actually had some spoons, a couple of spoons, and she traveled with a young Tibetan man who she called her son. She put grease, cooking grease, charcoal grease. She rubbed the outside of a pot and rubbed it on her face so that she would not appear pale. And at one point, some unfriendly folks came upon them as they were eating with these spoons. And she managed to provide an illusion to them that there were no spoons, that they were eating with their fingers. We can do that. I mean, it's not that uncommon. People do it all the time. If you believe something strongly enough, you can bring other people into the same view. But this is different. This is about a profound view in which everything we see, hear, think is actually a projection of our mind. Not this mind. It's a projection of our conditioning, our ideas, our assumptions. And we see this in many ways. For example, it's famous that if there's an accident, a traffic accident, the police will interview witnesses, and there will not be any corroborated testimony. They'll all have a different view. And including, for example, if a car runs a red light and smashes into a truck that is already going in the intersection, one person will say, well, it it was the truck that ran the red light. Or they will say it didn't come from the left, it came from the other direction. It's quite amazing, this phenomenon. When we take that into our daily life and we find ourselves in arguments with people or with strong opinions about things, then it's important to really take a look. Those strong opinions, those arguments are likely coming from our own conditioning, our own assumptions about the situation. And they can become a real source of pain and suffering for ourselves and for others. It's very much worth our while to explore deeply and open to this fundamental mind of awareness, to see through our conditioning and to, in the seeing through of it, letting it go. When we do the metta practice, one of the statements we make is that our mind become ever more clear so that we can see where we're caught. We can see our dysfunction. And in the seeing of it, it's amazing. There's tremendous power in that to allow it to dissolve. And as we really get a hang of this, we become immensely grateful for this possibility, and we are ready to continue it deeply. It is no longer the embarrassment or the regret that when we see a behavior that we're not proud of, that would be off-putting ordinarily. We welcome it because it means we can let it go. And that it will be really easy to let it go because we've seen it now. We've sort of seen through it. Its uselessness, its lack of truth, and so on. And I'd like to share now a little bit out of, again, this book, You Are the Eyes of the World. Know the state of pure and total presence to be a vast expanse without center or border. This is your true nature. Know the state of pure and total presence to be a vast expanse without center or border. It is everywhere the same, without acceptance or rejection. Blend the nature of mind and its habit patterns into non-duality. See through it. Because entities, whether subjectively conceived or directly experienced, are present as ornaments of one's own state of being. Do not accept or reject them. Because they're not divided into self and other, the apparitional, spontaneously present objects are the play of pure experience. Listen. This majestic awareness, freely transforming itself, displays the integrated structure centered around the inner reality of form. Everything that exists and appears displays itself in the space of unborn reality. In this inner reality, there is nothing to accept or reject. All that exists is displayed by me, the supreme ordering principle. Within that, despite that, there is this vast field of awareness. We are able, the more deeply we become aware of it, to function freely, responsibly, and effectively to circumstances in our life. It's not that we go into some kind of la-la land. It's that we are so profoundly present that there's nothing inhibiting our ability to respond. This is a very deep state of mind. And eventually, ultimately accessible through our practice. It is tremendous freedom, and it is inborn, and you can reach it with persistence, with ongoing persistence, with faith, with interest. You can reach it. So here we are on the 7th day, just a few hours left in this sesshin. This amazing sesshin, where we have already done so much work clarifying the mind, even though it may or may not be recognized to each of us. It is definitely recognized to me as your teacher. And that means you can go even deeper in these last few hours and walk even more incredibly into openness, into that doorway, the threshold of freedom. So don't let up. Keep going. This is the most potent part of sesshin. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.